lights out yet? Okay, you can see in the dark, right? You're really bats in disguise. I'd like to welcome all of you. Thank you so much for coming out. It's hard on a Saturday afternoon to find the time to come and do something like this, isn't it? Usually if you have a family, you got 10,000 other things you need to be doing, and we do appreciate your interest in our project. As Commissioner Bonilla has already outlined, we are a not-for-profit statewide bat conservation organization. We're called the Florida Bat Conservancy. It's a simple name, and that's exactly what we do. We do everything we can to conserve our existing bat populations within the state of Florida. We are also closely affiliated with Bat Conservation International, which is a long-time bat conservation organization formed by Merlin Tuttle in the early 1970s when I was a mere child, and I think I was like member number 2. And I've been associated with that organization for over 40 years. So I don't feel that old until I look in the mirror. And then I'm like, wow, when did all that happen? But I am dedicated, committed, and excited about bats and bat house projects within communities, particularly in areas like East Orange County, where we're starting to see so much more development occurring. And the reason we're worried about our bat populations in Florida is because as trees come down, bat populations decline. It's very simple. Loss of habitat equals loss of wildlife, loss of butterflies, loss of wildflowers, loss of tree-dwelling creatures, including birds. So bats in Florida are tree dwellers. They're crevice roosters for the most part, which means they like to be in holes and cracks underneath loose bark, crevices, and crevices and holes are sometimes created in old trees by lightning strikes or fire scars or hurricane damage. The problem is that most of the really old trees in Florida that had those features have been timbered out. And what we're left with right now are rows and rows and rows of slash pines, which are being harvested for the paper industry, for the paper mill industry. And there's nothing wrong with a sustainable market for wood, but we need to be careful that we don't overbalance one kind of wood and at the expense of all the others that are so important for wildlife. So I would urge you, if you have trees on your property, regardless of whether they're oak trees or sable palms, our state tree, I would encourage you to protect them and keep them healthy and keep them well, because they're going to be incredibly important for wildlife in the near future. So let's go ahead and jump right into the program. I'm going to have to kind of migrate over here a little to advance the slides. I apologize for that, but hopefully we can make it all make sense. There's lots and lots of myths and misconceptions about bats, and one of the things we want to talk about first and foremost in our program today is all the things that people fear. Because we found out that if you fear something, you're not going to care about whether it lives or dies. You don't care about conserving it. We want you at the end of this program to love bats as much as I do. Yeah, right. Never happened. But we want you to not be afraid of bats. We'll settle for that, okay? And one of the things we want to talk about are the myths. This is a myth. Bats are not blind animals, and they never were. We know today that bats can see remarkably well, better than people can, certainly, and absolutely better at night than almost any other hunting mammal. We think some species of bats can see equally as well as hunting tigers. And we all know how well cats can see in the dark. So this idea that bats are blind animals, that they're going to stumble, bum around, and our perception was that they fly like they're half drunk or loaded or whatever, and they're all over the place, and we assume they're going to fly into things. That's just not true. Every move a bat makes is choreographed and designed to catch insects. So what you're watching is a fast motion ballet that is created by these bats with their wonderful flexible wings so that they can hunt and continue to eat insects every single night. You might be interested to know that a single bat, like our little friend up here, this long-eared bat without his eyeglasses on, can consume his own body weight every night in bugs. And for a bat that size, we're talking about 4,000 insects a night. And in Florida, our bats hunt year-round because we don't have cold winters. 84 degrees outside today in January, right? We don't have really cold winters, so our bats in Florida don't hibernate, they stay active year-round. And because they stay active year-round, a single bat like this can eat over 1.5 million insects every single year. Now that's a lot of bugs for one bat. When you multiply that times however many bats are in this colony, some colonies consist of 40 bats, some colonies consist of 4,000. There's a couple colonies in Florida that are over 1 million bats in the colony. That's an awful lot of insect control in everyone's neighborhood every single night. Literally, billions and billions of pounds of insects are consumed by bats in Florida every single year. And that's free. It doesn't cost us anything. And it's not poison, and it's not going to end up in the waterway, and it's not going to poison your children or your dog. And you don't have to put those little yard signs up to say, oh, I was just treated for pesticides, stay off the grass. None of that has to happen. It's cost effective and it's free and it's natural and it's comprehensive, and no amount of money can replace the number of insects that these bats are consuming. So we want to make sure everybody understands the value of this insect control. So they are not blind. However, they do have a special skill called echolocation, and it does make them extra sharp when they're hunting. Not only can bats see when they're hunting, but they're also sending out sound waves with their mouths. They open their mouths and make a sound call. It echoes a very high frequency call, sends out all over the landscape. In these two little cartoons here, this picture, the yellow waves coming away from the two animals represent the sound the animal's making, and the red represents the contact echo. Yes, and underwater, of course, we have great whales and dolphins that echolocate. Above land, we have bats. There's also some species of birds we're finding out that echolocate. A lot of cave-dwelling birds we have recently discovered, like swifts and oilbirds, are actually echolocating when they're inside the cave system. We know hummingbirds are using echolocation in some cases. So there's not just bats. We're starting to figure out that this is a wonderful skill, but bats aren't alone. They're not the only ones that have evolved this ability to use sound to help them navigate through a landscape. As the echo returns to the bat's ear, the bat is processing that echo information very rapidly, very quickly. These bats, when they're hunting, are sending out between 20 and 200 calls per second. When a bat is imminently ready to grab its prey, it starts echolocating rapidly. 200 calls per second, it sounds like a buzz. We can't even differentiate the difference in the sound, in the calls, in the pattern. It just goes bzzz. And in fact, we call it a feeding buzz. When we hear it on detectors, when we see it on our radars, on our detector screens, when we see it represented on our computers, it looks just like a line of zigzags. It's a buzz. And that's when the bat gets the bug, right there, that feeding buzz. So echolocation is a wonderful skill that bats have. Dolphins and great whales as well underwater, we call that sonar. And of course now, hi guys, come on in, have a seat. Are you guys, that's it? Are you coming in? Coming in? We'll wait just a second. Come on in. Okay. Now we can add human beings to the list, all right, of echolocating animals. Here we have a wristband type device called an HELP, and this is a device that was developed by researchers who were working with acoustics and bats, and specifically with bat echolocation. And they were able to develop a nuanced version of echolocation for blind and vision impaired people to use so that they can navigate through space without the use of someone to help them or even a dog. Now, I'm not against dogs, I love them, I got several. But, you know, if somebody can have the freedom to go and get an autonomously operated automobile and go to the mall and have lunch with their friends and never have to use a dog, that's a wonderful freedom for someone with vision impairment. And that's exactly what we're going to start seeing on the horizon. These instruments are being used today. People wear headphones so they can train their ear to be able to discern and decipher the echo. And these folks are doing wonderful things, navigating through mazes. There may come a time when they may actually be able to see a visual image on a pair of glasses and be able to actually operate an automobile. So we have lots and lots of things we're learning about bats, and we're translating that information medically into the human world and assisting human beings that need help. It's a wonderful time for us to be involved in acoustics. So people can also echolocate. Next myth, all bats are vampires and they're bloodsuckers. That's a cute bat. He is a vampire, but he's not that big in real life. Only in Hollywood movies is he that big. Vampire bats do exist. There are 3 known species of vampires. There's 1,400 named species of bats on Earth, and only 3 that eat blood. The vast majority of bats eat insects. So only the 3 that eat blood, they're all what we call New World bats. All 3 species live only in Central America. They live in dense tropical jungles where there's very little flying room. It's a lot of vertical vegetation and vines and densely connected trees and buttressed roots and lots of different kinds of vegetation. So these bats are actually de-evolving or losing their ability to fly. Instead, they've developed these very strong forearms and nice big strong wrists and big tall back limbs. And they've actually developed the ability to walk upright over the tops of buttressed roots and climb in trees. They're very good climbers and they're very good at living in trees, and that is where their prey actually lives. All 3 of these vampire species prefer the blood of birds. Avian blood is much easier for them to digest, and they really do not have a preference for mammalian blood. So this idea that Hollywood has cooked up in popular literature about vampires, you know, attacking people in the night and sucking their blood and all that, that's all just nonsense. It's a great scary story, but it is purely a story. It has no basis in fact at all. All three of these vampire species are small. This is the largest of the three. It's called Desmodus rotunda, rotunda meaning big. It has a wingspan of 13 inches, which it hardly ever opens its wings because it doesn't fly anymore. And it weighs about 16 grams, which is about the size of a ping pong ball, basically. So not a very big bat. And the amount of blood that these bats take from a bird that's sleeping in a tree is less than a teaspoon. And once the bat eats the blood from the bird's toe, takes a little cut, licks up the blood from the bird's toe, like with its tongue, he crawls away. The sleeping bird never even wakes up. These bats are so gentle in the feeding process that roosting birds that are sound asleep, wild birds in the jungle, never even stir. Doesn't even disturb them. So very gentle animals. Not the dangerous, aggressive, demonic creatures of this man's imagination. Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula, the Irish novelist who wrote the book Dracula, was published in 1897. Since its publication date, it is one of 2 publications in the whole world that have never gone out of print. It's continuously being printed in many languages. The other book is the Bible. So we have the Holy Bible on one hand and we have Dracula on the other. Now, that kind of tells you something about the human psyche, doesn't it? We're real confused sometimes. But we love scary stories, don't we? And we love to be scared out of our socks, and it just releases endorphins, and it makes us feel, I don't know, edgy and alive. That's pretty sad, because our ancestors used to feel alive while they were running across the Serengeti being chased by a tiger. That made them feel alive. Now we have to make stories up, okay, to make ourselves feel our adrenaline rush. This man is responsible, probably solely responsible, for more misinformation about bats than just about anybody I've ever seen. He didn't mean it. It was a pure fabrication, a story, but many people embraced the story and took it to heart and got very excited about it. In the Victorian era, when this book was published, there wasn't a whole lot going on in the world that was interesting. And anything like this that came down the pipe that was sensuous and different and a little dangerous was way off the scale. And people really warmed up to it. And ever since then, people have continued to perpetuate the myth of vampires and Dracula. Excuse me one second. I'm going to close this now, just because there's so much light coming through. I'm going to close this because of the light. I can't stand it. I'm a vampire. I can't stand the light. So, I want to tell you, though, this man was a plagiarist. Shocking, isn't it? The original vampire story was called The Vampire, A Tale, and was written by this man, Polidori, in Great Britain and England, and published in 1819, a full 90 years before Bram Stoker's book came out. Stoker got a hold of this publication, and he read this interesting little short story about a sophisticated, wealthy, handsome, aristocratic man who preyed on unsuspecting, beautiful, stupid women. Go figure. That's a pretty basic story, right? Had all the sensuous, all of the elements, all of the things about the Dracula imagery that he really enjoyed, that he read that book, and he thought it was really interesting. So he took the story and he developed it into a bigger, grander version. And that is what we read today. Nevertheless, this was the original story. If you ever get a chance to look this book up, it's a short story. It's pretty scary, truthfully, for when it was written. Vampires do not exist. However, they do exist in our imagination and in Hollywood. They oftentimes exist in people that we consider historical figures. On the left, we have Vlad the Impaler, who was probably the original vampire. He was considered a vampire by many of his enemies. He was a Dark Ages warlord in Central Europe. He there's never really been any fact or any substantiation to the fact that he says he drank his enemy's blood. But the fact that he said that to people and quelled his enemies and made them afraid that they would be disemboweled and he would drink their blood in front of them, made most of his enemies drop their weapons and run. So he never really had a super big battle. He didn't have to. He was just scaring you verbally. He figured out how to control the masses with his mouth instead of the sword. And that continues today, by the way. On the right-hand side, we have my favorite actor of all time, Bela Lugosi. another European who took the Dracula character, the very first version, visual version in the big screen Silver Age of Hollywood, and he took it from the book and he developed a real, tangible character with very real characteristics. This man scared more people and is the basis of more vampire movies than anyone on earth because he put a visual edge on it. He's still the gold standard by which most vampire characters or Dracula characters are measured today. So he just really took it to the nth degree. Are vampire bats the only animals in the world that eat blood? Absolutely not. There's many, many hundreds of species of animals that engage in eating blood, not the least of which is human beings. There are many human beings in cultures and in some subcultures, still today around the world, where gatherers and hunters will make a kill, and they will, in a ritualistic manner, spill blood from the animal on the ground and then drink the blood in order to thank whatever it is their belief system is for sustaining them and providing them with food. This is not an uncommon practice in many cultures, and it was a very common practice in North America with American natives. Here we have mosquitoes, bed bugs, fleas, ticks, lice, flies, you name it. There's a whole host of biting insects that do engage in eating nothing but blood. Now the mosquito up there on the upper left-hand corner is a female. We know it's a female mosquito because only females actually bite and engage in blood meals. And we know that mosquito species that are going to begin to lay eggs, when a female's pregnant and beginning to lay eggs, she takes a blood meal for the extra protein content so that triggers the actual egg-laying process. What's wonderful about bats is about between 30 and 50% of their nightly diet is mosquitoes. They don't eat just mosquitoes. They eat all kinds of bugs that are out flying around at night, but they eat lots of mosquitoes. And for every mosquito that they eat, if it happens to be a female, they are not controlling one mosquito, they're controlling the one mosquito plus all the eggs that she's not going to get to lay. And in some species, that numbers into thousands and thousands of larvae every single week. These animals are highly prolific breeders. They are laying eggs every other night. So this is an important part of insect control with our bat friends. They actually exponentially help to control many more billions of insects than what they just consume because they interrupt the breeding cycle. So just to kind of think about that big number.